Tonight we have a speaker that I have admired for quite a while. He started in broadcasting with CBS Radio in 1965 and worked in almost every capacity, from management to the guy behind the mic. In 1990, he began the Steel on Steel radio show. It was a syndicated program, a regional program in the Denver area. And in 1995, the Information Radio Network purchased it, and he has been working out of Coeur d'Alene for the last few years. You may have heard him. He's a host of Chuck Missler's program, and you probably recognize the voice. Also, he's the host of the Financial Sense News Hour with another person I admire a great deal, Jim Pafava. You might have heard of The Perfect Financial Storm, a book that he wrote. And he is a widely respected financial advisor that has his own program with about 500,000 listeners every week. And go to financialsense.com and you can take advantage of that. John Loeffler is the man who tells you what's going on a year, 2, or 3 years before everyone else does. He is the cutting edge, no pun intended, of information. And I want to encourage you to pick up the flyer that's out there. Get a free month, free trial subscription. It's worth it. My wife and I have subscribed for many years, and it's a great program. It's really the bleeding edge of information. And so, without any further ado, the host of Steel on Steel radio program, and man I greatly admire, John Loeffler.
I promised Tom Reed I'd record a backup here in case something goes poorly. So. Besides, if I run out of things, if I run out of material for the radio show, what I do is I just run my
speeches, take clips out of that, so it's really there. Did you say the bleeding edge or the leading edge?
The bleeding edge.
Okay, there it is. I couldn't figure that out. It's just really there. I have always liked acting. Before we get started here, I've always liked acting and performing. But the one thing you have to realize in politics is that politicians put their pants on one leg at a time like we do. They're very human. And when you meet politicians, you really realize that. When we see things on the tube, you tend to idolize people, or they're a little bigger than life type of things. And just meeting people, one of the perks of the business that we've been doing, my wife and I met working for public television almost 30 years ago, is that you meet a lot of people that you see on the tube or in politics or whatever. When I was 18 years old, little cub reporter in Southern California, little 1,000-watt radio station. By the way, don't forget to turn off your cell phones, and I better do that too here. Thank you. Thank you. And I found out Ronald Reagan was going to be in town because they had a big budgetary crisis in California, so what else is new? And he was going to be down at the State Building. So I grabbed my little recorder and I ran down to the State Building and managed to swing an exclusive interview with Governor Reagan. And here I am standing, and I'm short, I'm 5'7", and he was a fairly tall gentleman. But he was kind enough to give me 5 minutes of his time, and we talked there. And I'm standing there with my microphone in his face, trying to think of intelligent questions to ask the Governor of California. And all I could think of, because you'd seen him on Death Valley Days, remember that old television series? All I could think of was looking him in the face was, my gosh, you've got a lot of wrinkles. So, and Helen Chenoweth and I, bless her soul, were sitting in a radio studio not far from here just a few years ago talking about different issues after we'd gotten off the air. And I sort of leaned across the table and put my hand out like this. And I said, you realize, Helen, you and your colleagues are becoming obsolete the way power is being transferred to the administrative branch. And she says, well, I recognize that. She said, I'm not sure how many of my colleagues recognize that. So, who's this Ron Paul person anyway? Isn't this overkill? I'm always humbled when people come here to listen to what I have to say, because I try to keep in mind that I'm just a person like you. I we stepped into a function to do it, and we've tried, as Jim said, to be an early warning service, to actually say, okay, here we are now, let's analyze the trends carefully, ignoring what the mainline crowds say, and try to figure it out. And then tries to stay somewhere between 24 to 48 months out to be an early warning service, is what we say on the program. And so I'm always humbled when people come out to listen. Hopefully I'll say things that are worthwhile. I'm even looking forward more to the question and answer session because I like to interact with people. The best thing I love to do is walk around when we travel and talk to people at quick stops and restaurants and everyone, and ask them what they think about political issues. You get a much better feel for the pulse of America by talking to people. And if there's one thing Americans will do, is talk. All you got to do is ask them a question and they'll talk. I did think it was a mistake coming here tonight. This is a bookstore, and anyone who knows better knows not to let me within 100 feet of a bookstore because you never get me out of here. Even the kids know that. Oh no, Mom, Dad's headed for the bookstore. Fortunately, my new son-in-law of 7 months has the same addiction, so both of us head for the bookstore together. I first met Ron Paul back in 1983, 84, somewhere there in Denver, Colorado. And I was working with Spence Arnold, you probably don't know Spence, at a company called AB Teletape, to produce a series of tapes on what America needed to do for a sound money system. And they had done a series with Ron Paul. And I walked into Spence's place one day, and he says, come on back to the office, I want you to meet somebody. So I walk into the office, and sitting there next to the desk is Congressman Ron Paul. And I didn't know who he was at the time. I mean, this was a first. Most people didn't know who he was at the time if you lived outside of Texas in his district. And he was sitting there, and he had that wiseacre grin on his face that he still has. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. So Spence went off to do some business, and Ron and I sat chit-chatting for just a little while, and then Spence came back in and said, okay, we're going to lunch. So he and Ron took off, and that was the last time I ever saw Ron Paul in person. I talked to him 2 years ago. We did a full-blown interview with Ron on the show. And I said, do you remember Spence Arnold and AB Teletape way back when? He says, oh my. He said, that is a way back there, isn't it? You know. But, you know, strangely enough, the things he said on that tape, I've still got a copy of the tape, about the need for sound money is very, very true today. You know, in reality, there's nothing new under the sun. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, I'm sure you recognize these ancient words. This is the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. The real one, not the Nicolas Cage version. Okay. Somehow, whenever you read these old documents, they seem to jump off the pages. It was a time when people were well educated in their language, in the history of their culture, in the history of Western civilization. They could speak several languages. They were familiar with the literature of the previous 2,000 to 3,000 years. It's a time very much different than our time, where the majority of Americans are historically illiterate. Large quantity of them are functionally illiterate, the product of a failed government education system which somewhere 30 years ago went off the rails and began focusing more on psychology and on teaching children how to think in a communitarian, socialistic mode than to teach them the history of their culture and how to think didactically and clearly with logic. You know, the men who wrote those words were putting everything on the line, including their lives, as a matter of fact.